Dad said, "Your brother's wedding comes first, you can reschedule your surgery." I nodded. 3 weeks later, they called asking why I wasn't there. Because I was learning to walk again, I said, and hung up. The phone felt cold and heavy in my hand, a dead weight pulling my arm down. Outside the consultant's window, a pale November sky wept a thin, miserable drizzle onto the hospital car park. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of antiseptic and the unspoken anxieties of a dozen other patients waiting their turn. I could still see the image on the light box, the ghostly architecture of my own spine, the vertebrae in my lower back looking less like a neat stack of building blocks and more like a crumbling Jenga tower. The dark spaces where my discs should have been were horrifyingly narrow. Degenerative disc disease, Dr. Evans had called it, a fancy term for my body betraying me before I'd even hit 30. The pain was a constant, a low hum that could spike into a screeching siren with a single wrong move. The surgery wasn't an option. It was an inevitability. A spinal fusion. They were going to bolt me back together. "We have an opening in 3 weeks," Dr. Evans had said, his voice calm and professional. He'd pointed to the calendar on his desk. "December 4th. It's a cancellation, which is lucky. Otherwise, you'd be waiting until March. Given the rapid progression we're seeing, I wouldn't advise waiting." 3 weeks. A flare of panic, immediately followed by a wave of profound relief, an end to the agony, an end to the nights spent staring at the ceiling, trying to find a position that didn't feel like my nerves were being shredded, an end to the life that had been shrinking around me, corridor by corridor, until my world was little more than my apartment and the short, careful walk to the corner shop. I'd nodded, my throat too tight to speak. His receptionist had booked it, handed me a mountain of paperwork, and I'd walked out into the waiting area, my mind a dizzying swirl of fear and hope. That was when I made the mistake. I called my dad. I thought he'd be relieved. I thought he'd be supportive. I was, as usual, an idiot. "December 4th! His voice came through the line, thin and reedy. There was a pause. I could hear the faint clatter of cutlery in the background, the murmur of my mother's voice. "They were having dinner. You can't be serious." "They had a cancellation, Dad. It's a miracle." Dr. Evans said I shouldn't wait. I tried to keep my voice steady, but a tremor of the old familiar pleading crept in, the voice of a child desperate for approval. "A miracle? Don't be so dramatic. It's an operation." I could almost see him, sitting at the head of the dining table, frowning, gesturing with his fork. "Your brother's wedding is on the 6th. You know this. We've been planning this for over a year. My brother, David, the golden child, the one who had never set a foot wrong, whose achievements were framed and mounted on the living room wall, while my art school certificates were tucked away in a box in the attic. His wedding, a lavish, over-the-top affair that had been the sole topic of family conversation for what felt like an eternity. "I know, Dad, but this is..." I trailed off, not knowing how to explain the severity without sounding like I was complaining. "The one thing our family code forbade. It's my back. I can't put it off." Nonsense. The word was a slap. "People reschedule surgeries all the time. It's not life or death, is it? The doctor is just trying to fill a slot. Your brother's wedding comes first. Family comes first. You can reschedule your surgery." The line went quiet. The clatter of cutlery had stopped. I could feel my mother's presence, listening on the periphery, a silent co-signer to his decree. My entire world narrowed to the sound of my own blood roaring in my ears. He wasn't asking. He was telling. It wasn't a suggestion. It was an order. My major, life-altering surgery, the one that promised to free me from a prison of chronic pain, was being framed as an inconvenience, an elective procedure that could be shuffled around to accommodate a champagne toast and a 5-tier cake. For years, my pain had been invisible to them. It was a bad back. It was me not stretching enough. It was all in my head. I'd hobbled through family events, smiling through gritted teeth, leaning against walls for support while they bustled around, oblivious. I'd spent holidays doped up on painkillers, my contributions to conversations slow and hazy, earning me concerned looks that were more about my perceived listlessness than my actual suffering. They saw what they wanted to see, a slightly moody, unreliable daughter who lacked the cheerful resilience of her older brother. They didn't see the searing agony that shot down my leg if I stood for more than 10 minutes. They didn't see the way I had to carefully plan every movement, from getting out of bed to bending down to tie my shoes. They didn't see the tears of frustration I cried in the shower, the one place I knew I wouldn't be heard. And now, here it was, the ultimate distillation of my place in the family. My health, my future, my ability to live a life free from crippling pain was less important than my role as a bridesmaid, less important than the family photos, the optics of a united front. My presence at the wedding was non-negotiable. My well-being was... A strange calm washed over me. It was the kind of calm that follows a massive explosion, when the dust is settling and the ringing in your ears is the only sound you can hear. It was the quiet, chilling clarity of a final straw. In that moment, something inside me broke. Or maybe it healed. The desperate need for their approval, the deep-seated hope that one day they would finally see me, it all just evaporated. It turned to ash and blew away on the sterile, air-conditioned breeze of the hospital waiting room. "Okay, Dad," I said. My voice was flat, devoid of any emotion. I nodded, a pointless gesture he couldn't see, but it felt significant. It was a nod to myself, a confirmation. "Good," he said, his tone instantly warmer, relieved that the unpleasantness was over, that I had folded as I always did. "Now your mother wants to talk to you about the bridesmaid dress fitting. There's a problem with the hem." I didn't hear the rest. I was already moving, my body stiff and sore, walking back towards the receptionist's desk. I was looking at the smiling, harried woman behind the glass, and I was seeing my future, a choice. One path led back to that dining table, to a lifetime of being a supporting character in my own family's story. The other path led to an operating theater. It was terrifying. terrifying, uncertain, and I would have to walk it alone, but it was mine. I'll talk to her later, I mumbled, cutting him off. I have to go. I hung up before he could reply. I stood in front of the desk, my hands trembling slightly. The receptionist looked up. Can I help you? My surgery, I said, my voice clearer now, firmer. December 4th. I just want to confirm that everything is set. I will absolutely be there. She tapped at her keyboard. Yes, all confirmed. We'll see you then. I nodded again, this time with a small grim smile. Yes, you will. The 3 weeks leading up to the surgery were a masterclass in passive aggression and willful ignorance. My phone became a minefield. My mother would call, her voice fluttering with anxiety, not about my health, but about the wedding. I just don't understand why you haven't called the seamstress back, darling. Your dress will be all wrong. I'd murmur something non-committal. Blaming work, she'd sigh, a gust of theatrical disappointment. You just seem so distant. I hope you're not letting that back of yours get you down. The irony was a physical weight in my chest. They were so close to the truth, yet miles away. My back was getting me down, but not in the way she thought. It was dragging me toward a decision that would detonate the foundations of our family. My brother David called twice. The first time was to complain about the font on the wedding invitations. The second was to ask if I could pick up his friend from the airport the day before the wedding. I stared at my phone as his name flashed on the screen, a nauseous feeling churning in my stomach. He was the eye of the hurricane, blissfully unaware of the storm raging in his name. To him, I was just his little sister, the one who was a bit flaky but would always show up in the end. I let both calls go to voicemail. His messages were breezy and entitled. He didn't seem to notice my silence. Why would he? The world revolved around him. I was just a minor satellite. The only person I told was my friend Sarah. I sat in her tiny, cluttered kitchen, a mug of tea warming my hands, and I let it all pour out. The phone call with my dad, the years of feeling invisible, the cold, hard decision I had made. She listened without interrupting, her expression shifting from shock to a quiet, simmering fury on my behalf. Good, she said, when I finally fell silent, exhausted from the telling. Good for you. It's about damn time. Is it? I asked, the fear I'd been suppressing beginning to surface. Or am I being a monster? It's his wedding. He's your brother, not your owner, she said fiercely, reaching across the table to grip my hand. And they are your parents, not your parole officers. This is not just a bad back. This is your life. You have a right to choose a life without pain. If they can't see that, then that's their failure, not yours. Her words were a balm. She was the family I chose, the one who saw me clearly. She promised to take me to the hospital, to be there when I woke up, to be my point of contact. She would be the wall between me and them. Turn your phone off, she advised. For the next month, just go dark. You need to focus on yourself. Let them wonder. Let them stew in their own 5-tier cake and perfect photos nonsense. It was a terrifying thought, severing that digital umbilical cord, but it was also liberating. The night before my surgery, I packed my hospital bag, toothbrush, a book, clean pajamas, then I took a deep breath and I powered my phone off. The silence that filled my small apartment was absolute. It was the sound of a choice being made final. There was no going back. The hospital was a blur of sterile greens and blues. I answered the same questions a dozen times. Yes, I have a history of. No, I'm not allergic to. Yes, I understand the risks. Sarah was there, holding my hand until the orderly came to wheel me away to the pre-op bay. You've got this, she whispered, her eyes shining. I'll be right here when you get out. Lying on the gurney, staring up at the acoustic ceiling tiles, the fear was immense. A cold dread pooled in my stomach. What if something went wrong? What if I was making a terrible mistake, not just with my family, but with my body? The anesthesiologist, a kind woman with warm hands, leaned over me. We're going to take good care of you, she said. Just count back from 10. I remember thinking about my father's voice. Your brother's wedding comes first. I closed my eyes. 10, 9, 8. The thought was no longer an anchor of guilt. It was a life raft. I was saving myself. The darkness took me before I got to 7. Waking up was a slow, brutal climb out of a deep, dark well. The first thing I was aware of was a voice, a nurse. She was saying my name, her voice gentle but insistent. The second thing was the pain. It was a different pain from before. The old, sharp, nerve-shredding pain was gone, replaced by a deep, monolithic ache. It felt like my entire lower body had been carved from a single block of concrete. I was encased. The surgery went very well, the nurse said, her face swimming into focus. Dr. Evans is very pleased. I tried to speak, but my throat was raw from the breathing tube. A dry croak was all that came out. I was in the recovery room, a symphony of beeps and whirs surrounding me. A thick, rigid brace was wrapped around my torso, from my ribs to my hips. It felt like a corset made of iron. The next few days were a fog of pain medication, fitful sleep, and the steady, reassuring presence of nurses. Sarah came every day, bringing magazines I couldn't focus on, and relaying messages from her own life that kept me tethered to the outside world. She had my powered-off phone in her bag. It's quiet, she'd say with a smile. No drama. On the third day, the physical therapist arrived. His name was Marco, and he had the relentlessly cheerful demeanor of someone who enjoyed inflicting exquisite torture for a living. All right, he said, clapping his hands together. Time to get you on your feet. I stared at him as if he had grown a second head. You're joking. Never about walking, he said with a grin. The sooner we get you moving, the better you'll heal. It's going to be rough, but you can do it. Rough didn't even begin to cover it. The process of just getting from a lying position to sitting on the edge of the bed took 20 minutes, and the combined effort of Marco and a long-suffering nurse. Every movement was a negotiation with my body. The muscles in my back, sliced through and stitched back together, screamed in protest. The brace dug into my skin. Sweat beaded on my forehead, and the room swam. Okay, deep breaths, Marco Marco coached, his hands firmly on my shoulders. Now, we're going to stand. The feeling of my feet touching the cold linoleum floor was alien. They felt like they belonged to someone else. Marco and the nurse took my weight as I pushed up. A bolt of incandescent agony shot through my spine, and my legs, which had been numb and tingly since the surgery, buckled instantly. The world went white. "Whoa, we've got you," Marco's voice said from a great distance. They lowered me back onto the bed, my body trembling, my breath coming in ragged sobs. I had failed. I couldn't even stand. The confident, determined woman who had walked into the hospital was gone, replaced by this broken, helpless creature. That was a disaster, I gasped, tears of pain and frustration streaming down my face. "No," Marco said gently but firmly. "That was the first time. The first time is always a disaster. Tomorrow we'll try again, and it will be 1% less of a disaster. That's how this works." He was right. The next day, I stood. I stood for 5 whole seconds, leaning heavily on a walker, my entire body shaking like a leaf in a hurricane, before the pain and dizziness forced me back down. But I had stood. It was a victory so monumental it felt like I had summited Everest. This became my new reality. My world shrank to the confines of my hospital room, and my days were measured in tiny, agonizing increments of progress. Each day, Marco would arrive, and we would begin the ritual. Sitting up, standing, taking one shuffling, agonizing step, then two. My universe was the distance from my bed to the door of my room. Walking that 10-foot stretch felt like running a marathon. My legs were strangers. The nerves, which had been compressed for so long, were slowly waking up, sending bizarre and painful signals. My feet felt like they were simultaneously on fire and wrapped in ice. I had to look down to confirm they were actually moving when I told them to. I was learning to walk again, from scratch. It was humbling, humiliating, and the hardest thing I had ever done. During this time, the wedding was happening. In another universe, my family was gathering. My mother would be fussing over my brother, my father would be giving a speech, and they would all be raising glasses of champagne. Sarah told me the date came and went. She didn't offer any details, and I didn't ask for any. The thought of them, celebrating in their perfect, curated world while I was here, fighting to put one foot in front of the other, was too much to bear. The anger I felt was a cold, hard stone in my gut. It was a fuel. On days when the pain made me want to give up, I would think of my father's dismissive tone. "You can reschedule," and I would force myself to stand up. I would take another step. My recovery became my rebellion. After 2 weeks, I was discharged. Sarah drove me home to my small apartment, which now looked like a palace. She'd stocked my fridge and put clean sheets on my bed. The first night alone was terrifying. The silence was no longer peaceful. It was heavy with my own vulnerability. Every creak of the building made me jump. Getting a glass of water from the kitchen was a 10-minute expedition with my walker. I was an island, and the isolation felt profound. The days bled into one another, a monotonous cycle of pain medication, physical therapy exercises, and slow, shuffling laps around my living room. I measured progress in inches. Today, I made it to the bathroom without holding my breath. Today, I was able to stand at the counter long enough to make a sandwich. Today, I walked from the living room to the bedroom without the walker, my hands brushing the walls for balance, my heart pounding with a mixture of terror and triumph. It was exactly 3 weeks after the surgery, 1 week after the wedding. I was sitting on my sofa, my back throbbing, my legs tingling, when a thought occurred to me, a flicker of curiosity, or maybe just a masochistic impulse. Sarah had left my phone on the coffee table, still powered off. I picked it up. It felt alien in my hand. With a deep breath, I held down the power button. It sprang to life with a chime, and then it went insane. A cascade of notifications, a digital avalanche, voicemails, text messages, missed calls. My screen was a wall of red bubbles. 37 missed calls. Over 100 texts. My heart hammered against my ribs. I started with the texts. The first ones were from the week of the wedding, from my mother. "Calling you. Please pick up. Where are you?" Then, more frantic. "We're all worried sick. Is this some kind of joke? You're ruining your brother's day." Then from my father, his words like bullets. "Your stunt is selfish and cruel. Call us back immediately." Then my brother, his tone shifting from confusion to fury. "What the hell is wrong with you? You missed my wedding. My own sister." The messages got progressively nastier. Accusations, insults. I was selfish, vindictive, mentally unstable, a disappointment. They had constructed an entire narrative in my absence. I had done this deliberately to hurt them, to steal the spotlight, to punish them for some imagined slight. Not one message, not a single one out of over 100, asked a simple question: "Are you okay?" My hands were shaking. The cold stone of anger in my gut began to glow hot. I scrolled through the missed calls, dozens from my parents, several from David, even a few from aunts and uncles, no doubt recruited into the posse. They had been trying to reach me for a week, their panic and anger escalating with every unanswered call. I put the phone down, my breath catching in my throat. I should have left it off. I should have thrown it out the window. The venom in their words was a poison, seeping into the fragile peace I had built. I stood up, grabbing my walker, and started to pace the length of my apartment, the shuffle of my feet, and the clatter of the frame the only sounds. I walked past the window and looked down at the street. People were moving, walking, running, living their lives, completely unaware of the war being waged in my living room. In my head, the phone rang. It startled me so badly I nearly lost my balance. I looked at the screen. It was my dad. My first instinct was to ignore it, to turn the phone off again and pretend this never happened. But then I looked at the walker in front of me. I looked at the long, angry red scar I could feel beneath my shirt, a permanent reminder of what I had been through. The anger coalesced into something hard and sharp, a diamond of pure, cold rage. I had earned this scar. I had earned this pain. And I had earned the right to speak my truth. I shuffled back to the sofa and sat down heavily. I took a deep, steadying breath, and I answered the call. "Where have you been?" His voice wasn't a question. It was an accusation, fired from a cannon. There was no hello, no preamble, just raw, undiluted fury. "Do you have any idea what you've done? Your mother is a wreck. You humiliated us. You humiliated your brother on his wedding day." I listened, my silence a stark contrast to his tirade. He went on, listing my crimes, my selfishness, my cruelty, the shame I had brought upon the family. He spoke of the empty chair at the head table, the questions from guests, the shadow I had cast over what should have been the happiest day of their lives. It was a monologue of righteous indignation, delivered by a man who had never once considered that he might not be the hero of the story. "Are you even listening to me?" he finally demanded, his voice hoarse with rage. "What could you possibly have to say for yourself? What could have been so important that you would miss your own brother's wedding?" I thought about the last 3 weeks, the suffocating fog of anesthesia, the monolithic concrete ache in my spine, the terror of trying to stand and feeling my legs give way, the slow, agonizing shuffle from the bed to the door, the humiliation, the tears, the tiny monumental victories, the relentless, grinding work of knitting my own body back together, one painful step at a time. I took a breath. My voice, when it came out, was quiet. It was steady. It held no anger, no pleading, no weakness. It was the voice of a stranger. "I was learning to walk again," I said. The silence on the other end of the line was absolute. It was more profound than the silence of the powered-off phone. It was the sound of a world tilting on its axis. I could picture him perfectly, standing in his perfect kitchen, his face contorted in anger, now frozen in confusion. The script I was supposed to follow, apologies, excuses, groveling, had been thrown out. "What?" he finally stammered. "What does that even mean?" "It means," I said, my voice gaining strength, "that I had the spinal fusion surgery that you told me to reschedule, the one on December 4th, the one Dr. Evans said I couldn't wait for. I've been in the hospital, and then I've been at home, recovering. It means I've spent the last 3 weeks learning how to use my own legs again." I let the words hang in the air between us. I did not elaborate. I did not explain the pain, the therapy, the fear. I just gave him the facts, cold and hard and undeniable. He was quiet for a long time. I heard a faint, shuffling sound. He had probably sat down. You had the surgery?" he said, his voice small, deflated. The rage was gone, replaced by a hollow disbelief. "Without telling us? You told me to reschedule," I repeated, my voice flat. "You told me the wedding came first. I made a different choice. But why didn't you call? We were worried sick. We thought something had happened to you." The hypocrisy was so breathtaking it was almost funny. "You were worried," I said, a bitter laugh escaping my lips. "I read your messages, Dad. You weren't worried. You were angry. You didn't ask if I was okay. You told me I was selfish. You told me I was ruining everything. You assumed the worst of me, because you always do. That's not fair," he started, his voice regaining a sliver of its old bluster, the reflexive defense of a man who is never, ever wrong. "Fair?" I cut him off, and this time, the anger was there, clean and sharp. "You want to talk about fair? Fair is a father who asks how his daughter is feeling, not one who tells her to postpone a necessary surgery for a party. Fair is a family who notices when one of its members is in agony, not one who tells her she's being dramatic. Fair is getting a single text message asking, 'Are you okay?' instead of 100 accusing you of being a monster. Don't you dare talk to me about fair." I was breathing heavily now, the words pouring out of me, a torrent held back for years. "I have to go now," I said, my voice suddenly calm again. The rage was spent. There was nothing left but a vast, empty sadness. "Wait," he said, and for the first time, I heard a note of panic in his voice. The panic of someone realizing they have lost control, that the pawn has walked off the board. We need to talk about this." "No," I said, "we don't. You said what you had to say. Now I've said what I had to say." And then I did something I had never done in my entire life. I hung up on my father. The silence that followed was different. It wasn't empty or lonely. It was clean. It was the silence of a space that had been cleared of toxic clutter. I sat there, my phone in my lap, and I cried. I cried for the little girl who had always tried so hard to be good enough. I cried for the young woman who had contorted herself into knots to keep the peace. And I cried for the person I was now, the one who was finally, painfully, standing on her own 2 feet. The fallout was both immediate and drawn out. My mother called next, her voice choked with tears. It was a different tactic. "Guilt. How could you do this to us? To me? I'm your mother." I let her speak, and when she was finished, I said, "I'm sorry you're hurting. I'm recovering from major surgery. I'll talk to you when I'm able." And I hung up. My brother David sent a long, rambling text. It started with anger, then shifted to a confused, hurt sort of bewilderment. "Why wouldn't you just tell me? I would have understood." I stared at the message for a long time. Would he have? Would he really have told our father that my surgery was more important than his wedding? Or would he have joined the chorus, telling me to be a team player? I didn't know, and I realized I didn't care. It was irrelevant. The damage was done, not by my silence, but by their assumptions. I didn't reply. I knew I needed help navigating this. The emotional toll was immense. My first call was to Sarah, who listened to the entire story of the phone call and its aftermath. Her response was a simple, "Damn right." Her unwavering support was my anchor. My second call was to find a therapist. I found one who specialized in family trauma and CPTSD. Her name was Dr. Anya Sharma. My first session with her was revelatory. I laid out the whole story, from the years of feeling second best to the final, liberating phone call. "You established a boundary," she said, her voice gentle. "A very powerful, very necessary boundary. The explosion you're witnessing is not your fault. It's the sound of a dysfunctional system reacting to a change it cannot control. They are not angry because you had surgery. They are angry because you disobeyed. Disobeyed. The word struck me like a bell. That was it. I hadn't acted like a daughter or a sister. I had acted like an individual, and in my family's ecosystem, that was the ultimate transgression. Over the next few months, my life was split into two distinct parts. There was the physical recovery. I graduated from the walker to a cane. Then, one glorious, terrifying day, I left the cane at home. I walked around the block, my steps careful but my own. Every day, my world got a little bigger. I could carry my own groceries. I could stand long enough to cook a proper meal. I could meet Sarah for coffee and sit in a chair for an hour without wanting to scream. The pain was still there, a low, manageable hum, a reminder of the hardware in my spine, but the screeching siren was gone. I was free. Then there was the emotional recovery. The attempts at contact from my family continued, shifting in tone. First, there were angry demands for an apology. Then, offers of a truce, brokered by my aunts. Your mother just wants to sit down and talk. Then, a letter from my father. It was not an apology, it was a justification. He explained his stress over the wedding, his concern for my brother, his belief that he was acting in the family's best interest. He wrote, "I'm sorry if my words hurt you." The classic non-apology of someone who regrets the reaction, not the action. He ended by saying the ball was in my court. I discussed the letter with Dr. Sharma. "This is an invitation to return to the status quo," she explained. "He's offering you a way back into the system, on their terms. The question is, do you want to go back?" I didn't. I wrote one single response. It was an email sent to my father, my mother, and my brother. It was the hardest thing I'd ever written, harder even than learning to walk. "Dear family," it began. "I am writing this to provide clarity, not to open a negotiation. My decision to have surgery was not made to hurt any of you. It was made to save myself from a life of chronic and debilitating pain. The fact that I was forced to make that choice in secret and that my subsequent silence was interpreted not as a medical necessity but as a malicious act has revealed a fundamental problem in our relationship that I am no longer willing to ignore. I am in therapy, and I am focusing on my physical and mental healing. I cannot and will not engage in any conversations that involve blame, guilt, or a rewriting of what happened. I need space, and I need time. Any future contact will be on my terms, when and if I am ready. I wish you all well." I hit send before I could lose my nerve, and then I blocked their numbers. I blocked their email addresses. I unfriended them on social media. I erected a digital wall, a fortress around the new life I was so painstakingly building. The silence that followed was total. It was jarring at first. No more angry voicemails, no more manipulative texts, no more pressure. The holidays came and went. I spent them with Sarah and her family, who welcomed me with open arms and didn't ask a single probing question. It was quiet. It was peaceful. It was achingly sad, and it was wonderfully liberating all at once. I learned that justice doesn't always look like a courtroom verdict or a tearful, movie-style reconciliation. Sometimes, justice is quiet. It's the ability to walk to the park on a sunny afternoon and sit on a bench, pain-free. It's the freedom to make your own choices, big and small, without seeking approval. It's the peace that comes from refusing to participate in your own diminishment. My victory wasn't that I made them understand. Their narrative, I'm sure, is that I am the cold, ungrateful daughter who abandoned them. I had to make peace with that. My victory was that I stopped needing them to understand. My vindication wasn't their apology. It was my own 2 feet, standing firm on the ground. It's been a year now. I can walk for miles. I've even started hiking on gentle trails, something I thought I would never do again. My scar is a pale, silvery line on my back, a map of where I've been. I have not spoken to my father or my brother. I have exchanged a few brief, cautious emails with my mother. They are superficial, about the weather, about her garden. There is a vast, unspoken chasm between us, and I don't know if it will ever be bridged, but I am no longer falling into it. Sometimes, when the phantom pains flicker in my legs, I think of that phone call. I think of the rage and the fear, and the cold, hard choice I made in that hospital waiting room. I chose the uncertainty of the operating table over the certainty of a life where I came second. I chose the agonizing, lonely work of recovery over the familiar pain of being unseen. This morning I climbed to the top of a small hill overlooking the city. The sun was warm on my face. I stood there for a long time, my back straight, my legs strong. I wasn't just standing. I was holding my ground, the ground I had fought for, the ground I had earned. It was a partial victory, perhaps, a bittersweet resolution. I had lost a family, but I had reclaimed myself. And as I turned to walk back down the trail, my steps even and sure, I knew, with a certainty that resonated deep in my bones, that I had made the right choice. I had chosen to walk, and I would never, ever go back to crawling again. The path to this point wasn't just physical. The sessions with Dr. Sharma were as crucial as the physical therapy with Marco. She helped me unpack a lifetime of slights, a childhood spent in the long shadow of my brother. It wasn't just the surgery incident. It was 1,000 smaller cuts. It was David's football trophies getting a dedicated shelf while my art competition awards were put in a drawer. It was family vacations planned around David's sports schedule, while my pleas to visit a museum were dismissed as boring. It was my father teaching David how to change the oil in a car, while I was told to help my mother with the dishes because that's what girls do. Each instance, on its own, was minor, a small sting, but woven together, they created a tapestry of dismissal. I was the supporting actress, the background scenery in the grand drama of my brother's life. Dr. Sharma called it the identified patient and the golden child dynamic. David could do no wrong. He was the repository of all their hopes and ambitions. I, on the other hand, was the identified patient, the one who was sensitive, difficult, or dramatic. My legitimate legitimate needs were often reframed as emotional problems or attention-seeking behavior. The back pain was just the latest, most extreme example. My demanding a solution to it was me being difficult. Understanding this dynamic didn't excuse their behavior, but it did explain it. It depersonalized it. Their reaction wasn't just about me. It was about protecting the deeply entrenched family system. My independent action threatened the whole rickety structure. My father's rage wasn't just about a missed wedding. It was the panic of a king whose subject has suddenly declared sovereignty. This new understanding allowed me to grieve. I grieved for the family I wished I had, the one where love wasn't conditional, where support wasn't transactional. I let myself feel the profound sadness of that loss, a sadness I had been suppressing for years with a brittle shell of resentment. In therapy, I learned to separate the people from the roles they played. I could love the memory of my father teaching me to ride a bike, while also acknowledging that the man he became was incapable of giving me the support I needed. Meanwhile, the physical work continued. I joined a gym with a pool and started swimming. The water was a revelation. It held me, supported me, allowing me to move with a freedom I hadn't felt in years. Laps in the pool became a form of meditation. With each stroke, I felt stronger, not just in my core and my back, but in my soul. I was literally and figuratively building my own support structure. One day, about 6 months after the surgery, I ran into an old family friend at the grocery store. Her name was Carol, and she was my mother's closest confidant. Her face registered shock, then a sort of pitying concern. "Oh, my dear," she said, her voice hushed, placing a hand on my arm. "We've all been so worried. Your mother is just beside herself." I braced myself. "I'm doing much better now, thank you," I said, my voice polite but firm. I kept my hand on my shopping cart, a physical barrier. "It was just such a shock," she continued, undeterred. "To go to such extremes, to miss David's wedding. Your family loves you so much. Whatever they did, I'm sure they didn't mean to hurt you." There it was, the party line, the official narrative. I was the one who had gone to extremes. I was the one who had been hurt by a well-meaning but misunderstood family. My surgery was an extreme. Missing the wedding was the crime. The reason for it was just an emotional overreaction. In the past, this encounter would have sent me spiraling. I would have felt a hot flush of shame, a desperate need to explain and justify myself. I would have left the store feeling small and misunderstood. But this time was different. I looked Carol directly in the eye. I didn't smile. "It wasn't an extreme," I said, my voice low and steady. "It was a medical necessity. My other option was to risk permanent nerve damage and a lifetime in a wheelchair. I'm sorry they chose to see it as anything else, but their interpretation doesn't change the facts." Her mouth opened, then closed. She was taken aback by the directness, by the absence of apology in my tone. She was expecting the sensitive girl. She was met with a woman who had fought her way back from a surgeon's scalpel. "Well," she stammered, retrieving her hand, "I'm just glad to see you're on your feet." The unintended pun hung in the air. "Me too," I said, and I pushed my cart past her and continued down the aisle. I didn't look back. It was another small victory, another brick in the fortress I was building. I realized my recovery had given me more than just mobility. It had given me a spine, in every sense of the word. A few weeks later, a check arrived in the mail. It was from my father, for a substantial amount of money. There was no letter, just a note in the memo line, "To help with your expenses." I stared at it for a long time. It was his way. He couldn't offer an emotional apology. He couldn't admit fault, but he could write a check. It was an attempt to fix things, to smooth them over with money. It was a bribe to buy my silence and my return to the fold. It was an admission of guilt wrapped in the insulating cloak of finance. It was his power, his language. I took the check and I walked to my bank, but I didn't deposit it. I asked for a cashier's check for the exact same amount, made out to his name. I mailed it back to him that afternoon, with no note. I didn't need his money. Accepting it would have been accepting his terms. It would have meant we were even, and we were not even. My silence, my peace of mind, was not for sale. That act, more than anything else, seemed to be the final word. The communication stopped completely after that. The silence from their end was no longer an angry one. It felt like a resigned one. They had tried anger, guilt, and money. None of it had worked. I had refused to play the game, so they had taken their ball and gone home. Life settled into a new, quiet rhythm. I excelled at my job as a graphic designer, my newfound focus and energy a surprise to my employers. I made new friends, people who knew me only as the strong, resilient person I had become, not the fragile, overshadowed girl I had been. I even started dating someone, a kind man named Ben who was a patient and gentle soul. When I told him about my surgery, I told him the whole story. He listened, and his reaction was simple and profound. "I'm so sorry you had to go through that alone," he said, and in that moment, I felt more seen and validated than I had in my entire life with my family. The first anniversary of the surgery approached. It was also, I realized with a jolt, just after the first anniversary of David's wedding. I wondered if he was happy. I wondered if my mother looked at his wedding photos and felt a pang of sadness, or just resentment. I found that the wondering was distant, academic. It was like thinking about characters in a novel I had read a long time ago. Their story was no longer my story. To mark the day, I didn't celebrate. I commemorated. I took the day off work and drove to a state park a few hours away, a place with a trail that led to a waterfall. It was a challenging hike, with a steep incline at the end. A year ago, I couldn't have walked to my own mailbox. Now, I was setting out to climb a small mountain. The hike was arduous. My back ached. My legs felt the strain. But with every step, I felt a deep, abiding sense of gratitude. Gratitude for Dr. Evans and his skilled hands, for Marco and his relentless optimism, for Sarah and her fierce loyalty, for Dr. Sharma and her wisdom, and for myself. Gratitude for the terrified woman who, a year ago, had made the bravest decision of her life. I reached the waterfall, the roar of the water a powerful, cleansing sound. I sat on a rock, the cool spray on my face, and I ate the sandwich I had packed. I was alone, but I was not lonely. I was surrounded by the strength of the trees, the persistence of the water, the solidity of the earth beneath me. I thought about my father's words, the ones that had started it all. Your brother's wedding comes first. He was wrong. My life came first. My health came first. My peace came first. It had taken me 30 years and a spinal fusion to learn that lesson, but I had learned it. As I stood up to begin the walk back, I felt a sense of completion. The story didn't need a final chapter where they all came around and apologized. The story wasn't about them anymore. It was about me. It was about the quiet, determined journey from a hospital bed to a mountaintop. The final, unexpected postscript to the family saga came a few months after my 1-year surgery anniversary. It arrived in a plain white envelope, addressed to me in handwriting I didn't recognize. Inside was a single photograph and a short, handwritten note. The photograph was from David's wedding. It was a candid shot of him and his new wife, laughing as they fed each other cake. They looked happy, but that wasn't what caught my eye. In the background, partially obscured, was my father. He wasn't smiling. He was looking off to the side, away from the celebration, and his expression was one I had never seen on him before. It wasn't anger or pride or authority. It was a look of deep, hollow loss. He looked old and tired and sad. The note was on a small card. It just said, "I'm sorry, from your Aunt Margaret." My Aunt Margaret was my father's sister, a quiet woman who had always stayed on the sidelines, never causing trouble, never taking sides. She had been one of the people who had called and left a stilted, awkward message during that first week, clearly at my mother's behest. For her to send this, to break ranks, was a quiet rebellion of its own. The photo and the note didn't change anything. Not really. They didn't erase the years of neglect or the venom of those text messages. They didn't make me want to pick up the phone and pretend everything was okay, but they did something else. They offered a sliver of external validation. Someone else had seen it. Someone else had understood. I wasn't crazy. My pain was real, and the injustice of it was real. Margaret's note was a quiet acknowledgement from behind enemy lines, a tiny flag of truce from a neutral party. I put the photo and the note away in a box with other important documents. It was a piece of evidence, not for a trial, but for my own history. A reminder that the truth is often quiet, hidden in the background of the main event. My relationship with Ben grew deeper. He was an architect, a man who understood structures, who knew that a strong foundation was everything. He admired the fortress I had built around myself, but he never tried to tear it down. Instead, he simply stood at the gate, offering a cup of tea, until I felt safe enough to let him in. He celebrated my physical victories with me the first time I could lift a heavy grocery bag, the first time we went for a run together, the first time I could dance with him in his living room without a single twinge of the old, familiar pain. He helped me see that my scars were not a sign of damage, but a testament to survival. He would trace the long, pale line on my back with his finger and tell me it was beautiful. He said it was a map of my strength. One evening, we were sitting on my balcony, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. It was the 2-year anniversary of the surgery. I was leaning against him, comfortable and at peace. "Do you ever think about talking to them again?" he asked gently. It wasn't a push, just a question. I considered it for a moment, looking out at the city lights beginning to twinkle on. "I think about it sometimes," I admitted. "I think about my mom. I wonder if she's okay. I think about what it would be like to have a family again." "But," he prompted. "But then I remember the price of admission," I said, my voice quiet. "The price is to go back to being small, to pretend it wasn't that bad, to swallow my own truth so they can be comfortable with theirs. And I can't pay that price anymore. It's too high." He wrapped his arm around me, pulling me closer. "Then you don't have to. You've built your own family. It might be smaller, but it's stronger." He was right. My family was Sarah, who still called me every week. It was Dr. Sharma, who had given me the tools to rebuild my mind. It was Ben, who had shown me what unconditional support felt like. It was even Aunt Margaret, in her own small way. It was a family I had chosen, one built on respect and truth, not obligation and pretense. The ending of my story isn't a dramatic reunion. There are no tearful apologies in the rain. Justice, for me, was a quiet affair. It was the severance of a toxic bond. It was the reclamation of my own narrative. My father said the wedding came first. He was defining the terms of my life, putting my role as sister and daughter above my existence as a person. My hanging up the phone was my counter-declaration. I come first. My life, my health, my sanity, I come first. I still have the walker. It's folded up in the back of my closet. Sometimes, when I'm cleaning, I see it there. It's a relic from a past life, a symbol of the absolute weakest and strongest I have ever been. I don't keep it because I'm afraid I'll need it again. I keep it as a reminder that even when you feel completely broken, when you can't even stand on your own, you can still find a way to take a step, and then another. And if you just keep taking those steps, no matter how small or how painful, you can walk away from the life that was breaking you and build a new one from the ground up. You can learn to walk again in every way that matters, and that is a victory that no one can ever take away from you.